Okay, I'm going to get us started. So hopefully everyone is here and ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Lori Staggs, and I'm an associate director in the Career Center at Grand Valley. I want to welcome you to this joint event with the Career Center and the Alumni Relations Office. And in this next hour, we're going to talk about everything job offer related. We have a lot to talk about, so hopefully we can get to it all in an hour. I have some wonderful people joining me, and I'll introduce them in a moment, but I first just want to mention a couple of things. Today is the last day of our Work Like a Laker conference. We've had a week and a half just jam-packed with events. It's been really great. But it's all leading up to our big event tomorrow, which is our winter career internship and summer job fair. That happens from 2 to 6 tomorrow afternoon. There is still time to get registered and to sign up for individual one-on-one conversations with recruiters. We are filling up. But if you haven't signed up yet, if you're looking for a job right now, great way to interact with some recruiters. So please look for that. We're going to put the link to our career fair website in the chat. So take a look at that. And then I would also appreciate it if you could check in for the event today. We have this wonderful tech accessory prize that we are giving away. And we have a sponsor of our Work Like a Laker conference, which is Consolidated Electrical Distributors. They were a sponsor of our fall Work Like a Laker conference, and they so graciously offered to sponsor us again. So we were able to put together this tech accessory prize for every event. So if you check in, it's just your name and email address, you will be eligible to win this prize. So thanks to CED for that. So just wanted to mention that. This is a webinar format, so though we cannot see you, you'll be able to see us, the panelists of this discussion. And if you do have any questions that come up during the event, we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to drop those in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to all those questions. Those of you that did register, we did get some of those questions beforehand. So we're going to try to get to those. It is a lot, but again, we've got a lot to talk about in this next hour, but we do want to incorporate those questions into the discussion. So please let us know those questions. So let's get started with some introductions. I also want to thank Kyle Barnhart from the Alumni Relations Office. He is here behind the scenes helping us with all the Zoom logistics. We so appreciate that we have someone helping us out with that because it is a lot. So thank you, Kyle, for helping us. Also, I want to introduce Troy Farley. He is the director of the Career Center, and he is here with me to help co-moderate this panel discussion. He is a proud Laker alum and can talk about that as well. And so thank you, Troy, for being with me to moderate. And then let's get to these introductions for our esteemed alumni panel, who are all human resources professionals. First, we have Brittany Garza. Brittany holds a bachelor's degree from GVSU Seidman College of Business and a master's degree from MSU's School of Human Resources and Labor Relations. In her tenure, Brittany has held multiple labor relations and HR business partner roles with Consumers Energy, General Motors, and GE Aviation, which is where you are now, correct, Brittany? In her free time, she enjoys traveling the world, which sounds awesome right now, right? And spending time outdoors with family and friends. Next, we have Bunmi Parks. Bunmi is the Director of HR and Operations for the Detroit Justice Center. Her degrees are in public and nonprofit administration with an emphasis in HR. As an undergraduate student, Bunmi worked in the HR office at GVSU, where her passion for HR started. After graduation, she worked as a community service learning center coordinator before transitioning to her first full-time HR role at Cascade Engineering. She's also worked as an HR analyst and senior HR generalist for the city of Grand Rapids and a specialty chemicals manufacturing organization. Lots of different industries, right? We were talking about that nonprofit, for-profit, government. So great perspectives there. She holds the SHRM, CP, and PHR certifications, as well as the CNP, which is the Certified Nonprofit Professional designation. She's also passionate about real estate investing and started flipping houses while on maternity leave with her first child. These people are busy people, I'm telling you. And then last but not least, we have Nick Weatherholt. Nick graduated in 2017 with a degree in finance and management. Nick has a very new title now at Bissel Home Care Inc. He is now Associate HRIS Analyst. Hopefully I said that right. He was previously a recruiter prior to this promotion. So congrats, Nick, on that. Nick has also worked in HR recruiting at Gordon Food Service, and prior to that was in training as well as a teller at Lake Michigan Credit Union. Nick holds his SHRM CP certification and is also working on his private pilot's license, which is also super cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint here so we can see our faces. And Troy, I'm going to turn it over to you if you'd like to kick us off with these questions that we have received. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori, and welcome everybody. And I have to tell you, 17 years working in the Career Center, the number one question I've been asked is, what type of salary should I expect? How do I negotiate? So the topic when Lori said, hey, Troy, would you like to help me on this one? You betcha, sign me up. So here I am. 10 questions were submitted, and all 10 questions really were similar to each other. So I'm going to kind of go down the list, and I'm going to start with the first question. When and how do you ask and then negotiate for a salary increase? Anybody can start on the panel.
I can go ahead and start if that's okay. Well, so this is a really good question. I think that, negotiating salary while you're in a position really requires you to lean in to the pay and compensation philosophy at your current employer. So that means understanding when those types of movements are typically happening in the organization, and keeping in conversation with your supervisor or your manager about timing. So in many organizations that happens around performance review time. So, that's an opportunity for you to really bring that up with your manager and hone in on those policies and get to know kind of what happens. So is it typical for title changes and pay changes to happen at the same time? Do they often happen in sync? Is the organization following steps? Are there steps outlined in a policy somewhere? So I would say really lean into the policies that your current employer has to be strategic about starting that conversation with your manager.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that. I've worked for a few different companies, and each one has a different policy. One company said we're only doing increases at this time of the year. Another one said we'll do them kind of rolling throughout the calendar year based on what's going on or when people are moving. I would add to that if you're going to approach this conversation, you should also come with, what have you brought to the table that would be a good indicator of a salary increase, such as, hey, I just completed this fantastic project which brought in X amount of savings to the company, or I've recently gotten my bachelor's degree or master's degree. What has occurred since the last discussion you've had with your supervisor about salary that might have changed the conversation since then? And if it's not time for a salary increase at your current company, it's still okay to have the conversation so that your manager has that in the back of their mind as they're going into planning in the next few months or several months down the road.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with both of them. Especially what Brittany said, I was going to add that too, is stick to the facts. Don't just come out of left field and be like, hey, I'd like more money because it's March 17th. Stick to the facts and be able to back up why you're asking for that raise would probably be the biggest aspect.
Thanks, Nick. It's really interesting as we're listening to this conversation. We're going through our performance review period at Grand Valley, so Lori's probably getting good tips, and so I might be being asked by Lori for a pay increase based on what you all say. So I'm gonna, it's kind of funny. I had numbered the questions I wanted to ask them, but I'm gonna already deviate. And how do you handle it if a company comes back and tells you that the salary either you're being offered or receiving is firm, that they cannot deviate? And then here's the second part, and this is probably the tricky one. How do you get the same offer a man would get for the same position if you have the same education and experience? So two-part question, what if they say it's firm? And then what if they feel that maybe that there's some discrimination based on
Pay equity. Yeah, like
that
across
is-
the board.
yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
So I can start with that one. I will preface this with my experience is solely based on what I've seen at large companies. So I'll, defer to my other panelists on what they might have seen. But in my experience, there's a lot of things that go into a compensation decision. It's not necessarily just going to be how many years have you been in role, or what degree you hold. We look at education, we look at experience, we look at performance, right? So let's think about if you've been in role for 5 years, your colleague's been in role for 5 years, but you knocked it out of the park 3 of those 5, and you got maybe substantially more of an increase than they got. That might kind of shift the scale a little bit, right? So I guess I'm answering the second part of the question, which is the discrimination piece. I would first want to address, do we know the facts, right? Do you actually know that there is discrimination based on that? And then think through what might those other factors be that have played into it. Sometimes I get this question from employees who think that there is discrimination, but in reality, there's other factors that have gone into this. Hey, this person has had significant external experience, or they've had multiple years of high performance, or they've received an advanced degree, right? Is it actually a level playing field and that we're seeing discrimination? And then the second piece to that, on a firm offer, in my experience at larger companies, when I have told a candidate it is a firm offer, that is typically because I'm trying to make sure I'm not disrupting that equity balance between the rest of the team. So if an external candidate says, hey, I want 50,000, but the rest of the team is all females and they're making 45, right? I might say 45 is going to be my firm, to not upset that balance and create that problem that we're talking about in the second piece.
Yeah, I agree, Brittany. And then just to add on to that, when, thinking about an offer and when a potential employer responds that it's firm, I would encourage candidates to consider more than just the base salary. In my experience, I've learned that, a lot is negotiable. And the reality is many folks just don't negotiate. So, if you're able to, get a little bit of movement in some other items like paid time off or flexibility in your schedule, those are some other benefits that add to the total compensation package. So if so that, again, you have to make the decision that's right for you and your family, right? So if the offer is firm, you have to be self-aware to know, okay, maybe I can make this lower salary amount work with my family, but I will need some give in another area. So that's the one point I wanted to make about that. And then about the discrimination piece, learning of what other folks make and things like that. I agree with Brittany, and I just wanted to offer a resource to folks. There's a website called 81 Cents. I'm not sure if folks have heard of it. It's pretty new, started in 2018, but that can really help you. It's targeted to minorities, so people of color and women, so underrepresented groups. It provides you with market data to help you have negotiating power in the market. So, and that is something I'd recommend for folks who find themselves either feeling like they're undervalued or underpaid, or just want to have more negotiating power. Check out 81 Cents. It is a paid service. However, they do offer some grants and scholarships.
Awesome.
I would definitely echo all of that. I think in my experience in HR, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to an offer. So like mentioned, is the internal equity is huge. I'd also be careful if a company comes back firm, they might have a second candidate in mind that they have no problem going with. So I'd be careful with that as well. I wouldn't be offended when a company comes back firm. I think, again, so much goes into it on the back end, into that offer recommendation and kind of the internal equity. So I would how do I say this? Companies do their due diligence when it comes to money, and they're not trying to short you. So the firm, I'm sure there's a lot of backup for why they picked that certain amount.
You know, Nick, I'll add to that. We've had, and I've had personally 2 students in recent years where a company made an offer, and the students, rather than consult somebody from our office, negotiated and counter-offered with what they would like, and the firms pulled the offer. And then the student was like, whoa, I would have taken it. Well, you got to be careful when you counter an offer. If it's above their grade because they said it was firm, you're right, they probably do have second candidates. And so I think you got to be very cautious. And I'll say, you know, talk to somebody at the Career Center, because we do have a lot of experience assisting through those conversations, because they're difficult, they're hard to do. So second question, and I would love to be the first to answer, but I'm a moderator, not a panelist, so I'm going to ask the question to our experts. Is there an appropriate way to ask how much a position pays during the interview?
Let's see, from my experience, my past companies, I probably don't have the best answer for you on that one. I think you should know your worth, kind of like what this is titled. You should know what your worth and what you're looking for. And a good recruiter will most likely ask you for that and what you're looking for in your next role. And then they should follow up with if that's in the salary range of the position you're applying for. Going back to the facts, if it's a position from company A to company B and they like line up, the position duties and what you're looking for lines up, I think you should have no problem with salary. What you're looking for should probably be in a line. Now, given if you move from like Grand Rapids to New York City, probably not, a little bit different. But I think it's more so being open about it up front during like the phone interview stage, instead of flat out asking, what's this position paid? You know your worth.
And to follow up with that, Nick, I feel like organizations, it's really, you can assess quickly whether or not an organization is forthcoming with the salary or not. So like, for example, if you're working for a nonprofit or a municipality, a government institution, those salaries are foyable and are public. So you really should be doing that research on your end. So you have a really good understanding of kind of what folks are paying anyway. But when you're in the interview, I'm of the opinion that the most appropriate time to bring up salary is when the employer brings it up. So after the offer is made. It is, in my opinion, a little premature to talk about it beforehand, because like I said, you could have done your research to have a good idea of what it is if it's not posted. So if it's a private company, for example, and they don't post their salaries, there's some research you can do on Glassdoor and PayScale to get a good roundabout number. You can also utilize your personal network to get that information. So, talking with friends, mentors, as Troy Farley said, the Career Center, to say, hey, what's the going rate for entry-level position at X? So that you can be equipped with as much knowledge as you need to kind of have that information before asking the recruiter before it's time.
I think that's great information, especially for these upcoming grads, new grads, folks that haven't been in the job market. I talked to a student a couple of weeks ago. He said, I went into the website, I started filling out the application, and it said expected salary, and I froze. And I just got out of the application because I think it's very difficult to know what to expect. Again, we talked about there's so much that goes into that salary. So I think doing a little bit of research is a great piece of advice just to try to get a general idea, a range. So thanks for sharing that. Go ahead.
And to know most companies do care. I don't think companies really want to offer lower salaries because it saves them money. They want to pay people for their skill set and what the market is. We get calls often and frequently from companies saying, what is the pay range for XYZ position? And we have a great database to really give them some good information on. And it's not anecdotal, it's based on our alums and where they're at and what they're doing. So I'm going to ask a quick follow-up that I know I gotta go to the chat because a question came in. So Lori, you mentioned that, and I get this question often. Students will say they're asking on the application or during the interview, what is my desired salary? Is it okay to give a range versus a specific number? And I'll open that up to the panelists.
I think it depends. So first off, on the system, some systems are looking for very specific $, number, comma, $, or what have you. Others leave it an open-ended question. So I think going, first, again, I'm gonna say it again, know your worth, definitely. Go back to that and know what you're looking for and what, I guess, almost the market's paying. And I could go either way on that one. I feel like if they're looking for $10,234, they put a lot of research in it because they're down to the dollar. Whereas I just get someone who's looking for $10,000 to $20,000 a year. They're just hoping for a raise probably at that point.
And I would say, answer that question honestly, right? But then also say that it's negotiable, because sometimes, if you have more qualifications for a role and you're also asking for a salary that's outside of their range, a recruiter may say they're overqualified. But if you are able to offer more qualifications for a role and then also say you're willing to negotiate, then there may be an opportunity for you to negotiate a different title, so you're not necessarily, kicking all of their, pay scales and pay titles out of whack. You're able to kind of be creative with how you come into the organization. So I would say, establish a good rapport with whatever recruiter you're working with at the organization. And, yes, it's a negotiation. So don't put all of your cards on the table, but be as honest as you can when responding to that. And then say it's negotiable, because everything really is negotiable at the point of an offer.
I would agree with that. And in addition to being negotiable, understanding what your bottom line is for negotiation, because if you do get one of those forms that is asking for a specific dollar amount, you need to go in with understanding, hey, let's say I'm making $45,000 right now. I know my personal family situation, I cannot live on 35. So don't put 35 in there, because in GE's instance, our applicant tracking system is looking at, okay, here's the pay range. What are people asking for? If you're asking for above the pay range and we know we cannot meet that, then it's not going to be a good fit for us. And it's good for us to know at the very beginning of that conversation that that's not going to work out, instead of kind of going through the whole process only to get to the point where you say, well, I'm not okay with that salary. And then it's not going to work out for both of us.
Great feedback. So I'm going to ask a question from the chat here. It says, is it appropriate to ask the company for reasoning behind a firm offer, or should you just accept that it is what it is without knowing their reasoning?
I think you can definitely ask. I think you should also be prepared to understand that there may be some things that went into that offer that they might not be able to share. So like I said before, if part of that reasoning was, hey, everyone else on the team is making this amount, or we recently hired in someone at this amount and you have similar experience, they might not be forthcoming with that information. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to ask. But I would also be prepared to say, if you're going to ask that question, are you also prepared to hold firm on that offer, and you would be okay to take that?
I would second that. That's really good. Yeah. I also, the only thing I could think of that you could ask about, maybe if you're relocating, and be like, hey, what's the cost of living in New York City versus Grand Rapids? And did you take that into consideration? But I honestly can't think of anything. I don't think a company would disclose details as to why they came to it.
Yeah, I agree, Nick and Brittany. And I also feel like you could shift the tone of the conversation to less about movement of a firm offer and more about what movement looks like once the offer is accepted. So the conversation can be, okay, so these are the facts, but how quickly do people move up? What can I do if I accept this offer to have upward mobility? And I think that is, a conversation that you can have at that point if the offer is firm and there's no movement immediately coming in.
Right, thanks, Bunmi. Another question came in, and it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it. If an employer does not list the pay range, and you do your research and see what a similar title in that area makes, is it okay to ask the recruiter, when asked, what pay do you expect? Well, I see that, and this would be the answer, I think. Well, I see that the average pay in Grand Rapids for a position like this is blank. Does that align with the pay for the position? Is that a fair question to ask?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'd say so. I'll add, I wanted to add this earlier, but I'll add it now. Depending on where they're getting their salary data from. So in my past life, I recruited for hourly positions. And if you go on Indeed and look at an hourly position, it looks like they're paying $25 an hour. They're not. And so you have to take into mind where that data is coming from. So Indeed, for example, a majority of it is candidate or past employer reported. The candidate probably got rejected, and the previous employee left for some reason, so they might not be the happiest. So they're just going to go through whatever they can on Indeed to leave, because I think Indeed requires you to report your salary if you want to leave a review or something like that. So be careful where that dollar sign is coming from, because a lot of it is not company reported, it's candidate past employee reported.
Yeah.
Is that the same? Sorry, is that the same with Glassdoor? And I know sometimes I recommend that as just trying to get a sense of, but Bunmi, you mentioned another resource too, or any other resources that candidates can do with that, trying to do that salary research.
What I like about Glassdoor is that it allows employers to take control of the reputation that is out there about them. So as an HR professional, a couple of the teams I've been on, it was someone's responsibility to actually respond to the Glassdoor comments and things like that. So what I like about Glassdoor is that it seems to be a little bit more monitored. And then the other recommendation I had was PayScale.
PayScale, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But I agree with Nick, a lot of those.
With a grain of salt, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's just kind of one of the, the legs that of research that you can do. I think, leaning on the Career Center, speaking with your network, any career mentors and folks in your network that you're able to chat with, I think would be best too.
Yeah, and when you're looking at position descriptions that sometimes they do put an hourly rate in, don't hold that to that is the only rate. And I give an example I'll give is every year for accounting, some of the smaller firms will put $20 an hour. And so a student will go 20 times 40 times 52 is $41,000, or give or take. My math might be off by a couple. But what they don't tell you is that you're going to be working for 26 weeks at time and a half at $30. And so your pay is going to be in the mid 50s overall, but they don't say that. So companies sometimes aren't great at explaining. And also when they put in sometimes their salary, what they don't talk about is their possible quarterly bonus or profit share, or they get a dollar match on their 401k up to 6%. And those are all things that are part of your overall compensation package.
Yeah, Troy, I'm glad you brought that up because it is about the total comp. And when you're looking at Glassdoor, Indeed, PayScale, Department of Labor, you should go to all those sources, and take one data point from each and kind of get a feel for what is going to be the average in that area. And that's what you provide to the recruiter. But think about that average in terms of, is that what I'm expecting in my base salary? Is that what I need to make my bills? Or, is retirement more important to me right now? And so if I get a really high 401k match, is that kind of going to offset that, right? Yeah. So total compensation is huge.
Well, and there's I mean, we have 4 kids, my wife and I, and my daughter up until 2 years ago was on our insurance program. Heck, she had a great job, great pay, good benefits, but she declined the benefits to stay in my insurance. And she got $360 a month kickback into her pay. So there's all these little things that you really have to investigate out when you're looking at the overall total comp. So I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm gonna go back to my list. How do you ensure you are compensated appropriately when you stay in a position or with a company for several years?
I think from what I've seen in the past is you'll have annual increases. We talked about performance review time earlier. You guys are going through it right now. That should keep up with the market pretty much. However, positions have salary ranges. And there's going to be a time when you cap out or you hit the top. So I would recommend being aware of that almost and having those discussions with your manager beforehand, before you get to a point where it's like, hey, you're capped out. Unfortunately, we can't give you merit anymore, or annual raise, or whatever the company calls it. So my recommendation is be aware of that. Performance review should keep up with it, but do know it will cap eventually.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think being in tune with how movements take place at your organization is really important. You know, folks who make a career at or who spend, many years at one place, as Nick said, performance and merit increases should keep up with the market, but then also don't be afraid to make other moves within the organization. So, exercising that commitment through your tenure is kind of how you've shown your loyalty, but it doesn't mean that you can only do one thing. It means that you love the organization, and maybe there are other skills that you have that could be transferable to a different position or a different area of the organization, and you could maximize your earning potential by making some of those movements within the organization. You'll see that at a lot of the older institutions like higher ed, municipalities, or governments. Lots of folks spend many years in an organization, but they may or may not be in the same position for that whole time. And that's a way to kind of increase your earning potential as well.
And have a realistic expectation too, right? So if you are going to be in the same role for a period of time and you haven't expanded your job scope, it's not realistic to expect a 6 to 7% increase every year. As Nick said, I think it's very reasonable to expect that it'll keep up with inflation, the 2 to 3% annual increase that you get. But if you really do want to make those big jumps, it is going to take significant performance or jumping to an expanded role or expanding your skill set or something else that you'll provide the company as well, which is why sometimes you might see you start interviewing with another company and they'll offer you more than what you're making at your current company because you're jumping to a different industry or you're jumping to a bigger job scope, right?
Yeah. So a question just came in. Is it ever okay to ask your current employer or manager where you are at in the pay range for your current position?
Oh, can I take this one? I can, because I get this a lot. I would say it definitely goes with, again, understanding your company's philosophy. So as an example, at GE, we do not share the specific, range of the position, but we'll say, hey, kind of here's where you are in relation to your peers, right? And the reason that we do that is because our compensation ranges are national ranges. So I've got one range for people in New York and California and Michigan. So it might not be the whole story. So I do tend to share kind of here's where you are within your peers, but understanding what the company's position on that is, I think it's a fair question to ask. The worst thing that you can hear is no, we don't share that data. But if the answer is no, we don't share that data, then again, going back to finding your data points externally and saying, okay, that's interesting. I'm seeing in the market that, people are generally offering this much for this type of role. Is that more aligned with where the company's at too? And if I'm off from that, can you help me understand how I can progress to that type of level, or if that's even realistic?
Good advice.
Nick or Bunmi, anything to add to that?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Nope.
That was
Same.
great.
Good.
Yep, it was a great answer, Brittany.
Good job, Brittany. So another question, once I receive an offer and compared to what I'm worth, what is the best way to handle the negotiation conversation? Great question.
Yeah, my immediate thoughts are definitely, don't respond right away. So, I think a lot of times and maybe, your first job offer, you think, okay, well, I just need to let them know right on the phone or right when they tell me. It's okay and reasonable to say, I'm going to think about it for 24 hours. And most recruiters and HR professionals expect that, right? So I've never called someone and expected them to accept a job right on the spot. The second thing is be excited. So, start with gratitude, right? So say, I'm so excited about this offer. I'm just really excited. You want to make sure that comes off in your, communication with the HR professional. And then, as we've said earlier, do your research and then be prepared to have that follow-up conversation with the HR professional. Again, starting with your excitement and then saying, that's when the strategy of negotiation happens. So you've got to, almost like you're shopping for a house, you kind of have to have your number in mind and, go up and down a little and figure out, what the right point, what the right asking dollar amount is, but just be prepared for that.
Can I ask a kind of a follow-up to that too? How upfront should the candidate be about where they are in the interview process with your company, with other companies? We've even heard students get the advice to accept an offer, even though they're still interviewing with other companies, and just so they have something in hand. And I again, on the one hand, I understand in this job market, like you want that security, but again, from the HR side of things, how hard is that conversation when a candidate that you've extended an offer to comes back and says, oh, by the way, what is your advice to our new grads or, young alums that just haven't, had a lot of that experience, and how do you handle that, the timing?
I would be very upfront about it. If you've applied to one job, it's pretty much assumed you've applied to more. So I don't think it should catch anyone off guard that you're also interviewing somewhere else. And almost kind of like you're providing transparency to the recruiting team. You can almost, to a certain extent, you can expect it back. Just being, okay, hey, we'd like to know them in the next 3 days. And then that's going to come down to you as a candidate being like, okay, my interview at company XYZ is not for 4 days. Is this current offer worth it to turn down that fourth day interview? So you really have to weigh out your options at that time. How bad do you want? Are you willing to risk your offer right now with company A to go with the other company? It really comes down to your passion or your excitement about the 2 companies or 3 companies or however many companies. But being upfront about it will get you a lot farther, I think.
Yeah. And I've had candidates reach out to me and say, hey, I'm super interested in this position, but I want to be upfront that I do have, another offer coming. Can you give me a timeline? Is there any way we can move this out so that we can have that conversation up front? Because the worst thing, in my opinion, that you can do is take an offer with a company and then, get onboarded with them and then decide to leave for another company. One, that's just in bad business, right? You wouldn't want a company to do that to you as a candidate, hire you on and then say, actually, we had this other candidate we wanted more, so we're going to terminate you now. And how do you explain that on your resume, right? I worked for this company for 3 weeks and then I left because I got a better offer. It just leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to something Bunmi said. And Bunmi said, be excited and smile. When you receive an offer, first of all, congratulations. It's a great experience receiving an offer. We have students and sometimes say, well, I think I just need to negotiate a higher wage because everybody does it. No, if it meets or exceeds your expectations, you've done your homework, it's okay to say yes. Wait a day or two, right? It's okay to say yes. If you are going to negotiate though, and this is advice I give, and so I have 3 panelists can tell me I'm wrong. or tell you I'm wrong if I'm giving bad advice. Never negotiate over email. And put your demands out there in email, because that's written. I always say, call the recruiter and share that excitement. Smile on the phone, smile during a Zoom. If you can meet them in the lobby, meet them in the lobby. Obviously with COVID, everything has changed. And sometimes it's okay to say, I'm excited about the salary of 52,000, but I'm just wondering if there's anything more you could do. Because if there's something they could do, they probably will try. But they'll also know you're not going to handcuff them, where if you don't get it, you're going to walk. And so work with them, because once you accept and start in a position, good things can happen in 6 months, a year, and they remember how you were onboarded.
First impressions are huge.
Yeah.
I always say smile and dial.
There you go. So now we get like a really good question. What is the best way to decline an offer if your salary needs just can't be met through the negotiation process?
I would pick up the phone and call the recruiter or the hiring manager and explain to them why it doesn't meet their expectations. They might leave it at that. They might, if you're like the top rock star candidate, they might go back to the drawing board and say, let me see what I can do really quick. And then maybe come back to you, but just being honest with them. Whatever you do, don't ghost them. That's the absolutely worst thing you could ever do to a recruiter, especially at that stage, is ghost them. I'm almost positive their applicant tracking system has either a checkbox or some way to track that you ghosted them and you've just ruined your chances at that company for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I will agree. I want to share a quote from an op-ed on CNBC. It says, salary negotiations are collaborations, not conflicts. You can be gracious, polite, and grateful while also being confident and persuasive. So, if you have to decline an offer, do that graciously and politely and kindly, because as Nick said, there's nothing worse than burning bridges. I mean, I've seen folks who've been called up by places they've even resigned from, right? So, I mean, you have to realize that it's all about relationships when it comes to your career, and, the reputation that you establish, even with the folks you have to decline, it matters.
Just treat others the way you want to be treated, right? You don't want a company to ghost you. You don't want a company to just send you a generic email that they're not interested. Just call them up and even tell them like, hey, I'm sorry that this opportunity isn't going to be the right fit, but I really look forward to seeing what other opportunities come up in the future. And I'd love to be considered if there's something that might be more aligned with my skill set and experience and at the salary range that I'm expecting.
Yeah, I totally agree with all those, especially the ghosting. We hear about that often, and it puts a bad light into the name of the institution as well as the individual. And I'll also say this, we have 3 young recruiters here that collectively have been with probably 9 to 10 different companies in their short tenure. Recruiters and HR professionals go from one company to another. And if you ghost them somewhere and you show back up against another company, guess what? They'll always remember who ghosted them. That won't go away. So let me get back to another question. What about negotiating a better salary at a current organization, but at the time of a title change or becoming a supervisor?
That's the perfect time to negotiate, right? It goes back to what we talked about before. Show what you're bringing to the organization that warrants that salary increase. Is it the additional responsibility that you're taking on? Is it, what's going to be perceived as a new project or promotional opportunity? That's actually the perfect time to have that conversation about compensation. And the answer could be, hey, we want to see how you perform in this role for a little bit, and that's fine. And you can revisit that later, but it would be an ideal time.
Yeah. Anything else, Bunmi or Nick, or is it covered?
No, I think that covers it.
Mhm. I
So,
agree.
so this question, and I'm not so sure I fully understand the question, but I think I do. How do you search for a position when the salary is not known?
Yeah, I think that is when you rely on a couple of things. So data that you can find on the internet. So searching some of those, websites that we mentioned and that I think were put in the chat. And then also relying on your network. So reaching out to folks. That's where I feel like LinkedIn comes in really handy, and just for people that you know, right? So like people who are friends or fellow alumni, just saying, hey, what would be the going rate for a mid manager in this industry? And that's how you can get some of those anecdotal data points as well. But I think that coupled with, just doing research that you can find if the salary isn't published would be ideal.
And I want to add too is there's no more questions on my sheet or coming in, so we're going to kind of do a little bit of a roundtable right now. But
I do see one question someone was asking about, and this is probably a wider question about following up. So there was one question about if I've had a first interview and I'm waiting for word back about next steps or second interview. How do I do that follow up? What if I'm not hearing anything back? And I think a lot of students ask that too, just how do if I've applied and I'm not hearing anything, how do you all feel as recruiters, as HR folks about, being followed up with? Maybe you can talk about like cautionary tales versus, how is that? How do you like to be followed up with, I guess?
One cautionary tale I would have is do not put the company on blast via social media. That is a very quick way to be ignored. So, you just don't do that. Don't go on LinkedIn talking about how you haven't heard from XYZ, because in my opinion, it could very much be a capacity issue.
Yeah.
In most times when an HR department posts a position, will say we are not able to follow up with candidates individually. Now, if you've interviewed, that's fair. You can reach out to the person you have interviewed with, whether it's the hiring manager or the HR professional.
Yeah.
To just get a status update. That's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is inappropriate to take to social media though, because I think at that point you're kind of blowing your chances.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. Yeah.
And Lori, another question just came. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I would echo that. Companies have processes to follow, and it's usually very specific. So give them time to follow those processes. If you're the first applicant, you move through the process very quickly. You might have a longer waiting period between interview 1 and interview 2. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're like kind of at the tail end of the candidate pool, you might move through all 4 steps very quickly. So companies have processes they have to follow to make sure they're ensuring a fair and equal recruitment process. So just allow time for those. And a simple email or phone call to the recruiter after an interview, I think is totally fair.
Excellent.
Another question just came in and is, are there any major differences between negotiating with a private company versus a nonprofit or governmental organization?
Absolutely. Yeah, when you're negotiating so you just have to think about the makeup of those 3 different types of organizations. A private institution, so a private company, for example, they don't have public shareholders, right? So a lot of times salaries and their pay practices are more tight-lipped, it's not public. A government or a higher education institution, those are public institutions whose salaries are public. So, the way they operate is going to be very different. The Freedom of Information Act requires them to provide that information. And not only that, there are often collective bargaining agreements that are tied in those environments that kind of guide their pay practices. So, and then if you have a for-profit public institution, commanding, probably a larger budget and have shareholders, that's different as well, right? So yes, though there's definitely a difference in navigating, pay at those three different types of organizations. Absolutely.
That's good.
Now the question just came in, coming in fast and furious now.
Oh, good.
Is there any caution to be had when you see a position has been posted for a very long time?
Not necessarily. I think, I'll give you a quick example. I had a position where we had a plethora of candidates that we went through. The hiring manager was on vacation for 2 weeks, so that delays the process, right? And even getting them in. And then when we got them, we said, hey, there's just not the right candidate for what we're looking for. So we're going to go back out and search for it. Not that, we didn't have the right, that it wasn't a good environment or not the right salary or anything. It just wasn't what we were looking for. So we want to be due diligent in finding that right candidate. So I wouldn't necessarily think that that's a red flag. Now, if you're seeing a position posted and then it's coming down 5 months later and it's going back up again and people seem to be rotating through that position, I might ask a couple more questions in the phone interview, such as, hey, why is this position open, right? Are you backfilling for somebody who left the organization, or did someone get promoted within?
I would add to some positions, more so on like the entry level side of the businesses, they have evergreen postings. So an evergreen posting is pretty much a posting that's always up, because a company knows that position, whether it has high turnover or maybe that position or that position or department is promoted out of often. They'll leave a position posted all the time, just because they know if they don't have a position today, tomorrow they could have a position. I know on the hourly side of things, especially in retail, that's very, very common. And then it's kind of common in entry level roles.
And I'd add,
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Bunmi.
no, I was just going to say, I'd add also that, if it's a higher level position, and if it's one that you really want to apply to, I would just make sure that it's not the tail end of the recruitment, right? And just be keenly aware, because some positions are posted for 30 days, 45 days. And if you're seeing it on the 34th or 35th day, then you do need to hurry up and get your application in, because it has been open for the window that it will be open for and is planning to be closed. So that's just the one thing I'd caution. If you see a higher level position out there that's been posted for a long time, it probably means that it had a designated window. And if you really want it, you should get your application material in.
And I was going to ask, in this past year with the pandemic and quarantining and all of that, what we've been all doing within the last year, how have hiring processes been in your respective organizations? Has it taken longer? Do you feel like it's about the same? What has been your experience in this past year, and even now, and maybe even moving forward in the next few months?
I would say it's been a lot more, how do I say this? So on the candidate side, scheduling is a lot easier, because you can easily put on your work calendar lunch from, if your interview's from noon to 1 and it's just a Zoom interview, you can easily get ready at 11:45 and be done by 1:15. You don't have to go home, change, drive, wait in the lobby. So that side's been fantastic.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would add. It's been great on that term.
Okay.
And I'd say that interviewing in my organization, in my industry, has definitely looked different, because I think so much of selling a candidate, selling an employer, right, is, showing them the facilities and letting them see the people and the work. So I think it just takes a lot of intentionality to have those touch points where you can still attract competitive talent. So, from the candidate perspective, I would say, find ways to stand out, even in a virtual interview. So it means that listening is all the more important, because that's the only, that video interview is the only opportunity that you're getting to showcase who you are outside of your personal branding documents. So yeah, it requires a little bit more, I feel like, on the candidate side to stand out. And I would definitely say practice. So practice a video interview, and make sure your technology is working, because there's nothing more frustrating than getting everything together on the employer side and then, sitting with someone who unfortunately is having technical difficulties. We know it happens, but I think that interviews go a lot smoother if you can try and work out those kinks ahead of time.
So Bunmi, my last question for each of the panelists, and it's going to be a real quick answer. What is your number one pet peeve? And Bunmi, you might have already shared yours, that candidates do during the interview process that drives all three of you nuts.
Love it.
Oh, one thing I can think of, and this has been through all of my recruiting experience, is when you're invited to an interview, whether that's a phone interview, a face-to-face interview, a Zoom interview, and you're asked for your availability, and you say Monday through Friday, 12 to 1 or after 5. Okay, that's fine, thank you. But also be flexible. You are interviewing for a job. The people you're probably interviewing with also probably work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And just be flexible about it. If you really need after hours because maybe you're in a customer facing role or something like that, be upfront about it. Be like, hey, I actually work in a customer facing role. It's really hard to get time off right now because of the pandemic. Can the candidate or the hiring manager do after 5? But don't just blanket provide your availability. 12 to 1 after 5.
Perfect.
So.
Brittany.
My biggest frustration is candidates who just aren't interested, and it's very apparent in the role. If you're not getting back to the recruiter in a timely manner, like with your availability, you're showing up to the interview and you're not prepared with questions, or you haven't done any research about the company, it's like a friendship, right? I want people who work here who want to be here as much as I want them to be here. Just like when you go to an interview, you don't want a company who hasn't read through your resume, right? So I just get really frustrated when candidates just seem to be very nonchalant about it and don't seem to care about the interview process or show an interest in the company.
Bunmi?
Same, lacking energy and preparation. And I think that it's real. There are so many opportunities to receive interview coaching, especially through the alumni, through the career services office. I often after an interview will say, well, they didn't take advantage of any coaching, because there are some low-hanging fruit when it comes to interviews that you just need to be prepared for. For example, explaining who you are. You've got to have that elevator pitch. So lack of preparation and lack of energy would be my pet peeves.
Perfect. Thank the three of you. And Lori, I'm going to hit the mute and turn it back over to you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think we're wrapped up. I think Kyle talked about dropping a survey in the chat box. So look for that if you've attended. I just want to thank these wonderful people for being here. I've learned things today. And, we do have these conversations a lot with our students and alumni. And I think what you shared with them today is so, so valuable. And so I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to do this. And again, thanks to the Alumni Relations Office. And yeah, great. Thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.